Chapter 13, we hear Jesus continue his preaching in Jerusalem just before the Last Supper, his passion and his death. Last Supper happens in chapter 14, so we're right on the precipice. And Jesus gives this apocalyptic prophecy. Now, whenever we're reading apocalypsis, it's a genre that was very popular in Jesus' time. We find it in the New Testament, we find it in the Old Testament, and we find it outside the Bible. Whenever we read this genre of literature, I guess you could say, we always have to remember that it's to be taken symbolically, that it's a metaphor. It doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that the words that Jesus is using are not exactly what he's talking about, like a poem. For instance, Jesus said, "Amen, I say to you, this generation shall not pass away till all these things have taken place." Well, what you and I know is that everyone who heard those words is dead, and they died a long time ago. So clearly, Jesus is talking about something else, except at the end. At the end, he's just giving us a little bit of theology. Of that hour or day, nobody knows. Neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. This has confused Christians for a very long time because we believe Jesus is God. And God knows everything. So how is it that Jesus doesn't know something, especially something so central to existence, to the universe, when it's all going to end? How is that possible? Well, in order to understand, we have to look at three things. First, why do we assume that God is all-knowing? Where's that idea come from? Second, how does the Trinity work? Now, I'm actually going to skip that step because I assume you're all on board with the Trinity. And if you want an explanation of the Trinity, Trinity Sundays in June. See you then. So we assume that what we say about God, we can say about Jesus. We'll skip that step. But then the third, how does that work? How does it work that one person of the Trinity doesn't know something another person of the Trinity knows? So first, omniscience. Where does that idea come from? It's not explicitly stated in the Bible, and no theologian worth his weight would use the Bible as an argument for this divine attribute. It comes from ancient Greek philosophy. Plato and Aristotle particularly looked out into the world and asked, why do things exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? Doesn't seem it has to be that way, but it is. And specifically, Plato came to the logical conclusion that there must be an uncaused cause. That everything that exists has a cause for its existence. There must be one thing that exists that has no cause. Aristotle called it the unmoved mover. We call it God. That God is the principle of existence. All that exists comes from him. Well, I won't get lost in the details, but as a logical conclusion of an unmoved mover, an uncaused cause, that being must be all-powerful, omnipotent, all present to everything, omnipresent, and all-knowing, omniscience. So that's the end of the philosophy. You guys can wake up, come back to me. But that's where this idea comes from. And it's so deeply rooted in our just collective thinking of God, our armchair theology, if you will. Like, if you might talk to someone who doesn't believe in God. I've had this conversation before. If God exists, why doesn't he just reveal himself? Come down and say, I'm real, and you should believe in me. Well, one, he did. Two, why do you assume that God cares about you? Why do you assume that God knows about you? Well, that assumption is rooted in Christianity. And our culture is so based upon these ideas that we take them as just true. If there is a God, well, he must be all-loving. He must be all-knowing. The ancient pagans, Zeus, for instance. You ever read read a story about Zeus, he's not all-knowing. He can be tricked. He gets very angry when he's tricked. But he can be tricked according to the ancient pagans. So human beings, when they think about God, don't necessarily give God these attributes. We do because we think it's the logical conclusion. All right, now I'm really done with the philosophy. So we apply those attributes to the Trinity. Jesus is part of the Trinity. So how is it? How does it work that Jesus doesn't know something? It's very confusing. Maybe St. Mark got it wrong. No. St. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, verses 5 through 11, writes the Christ hymn. He's probably not the original author, but the Christ hymn is really an important part of the Bible. It explains exactly what we're talking about today. It begins, although he was in the form of God, Jesus did not deem equality with God as something to be grasped at. Rather, he emptied himself and took the form of a slave, being known in human likeness. All right, that's very complicated, but we're going to focus on that one part. He emptied himself. The Greek word is kenosis, self-emptying. And this concept of kenosis is the key to understanding what Jesus is talking about. You and I are limited. We're born, we live, we die. We can't accomplish all that we think. We cannot bend the world to our will. But God can. You and I don't know everything. We have to navigate through the world with partial knowledge, making mistakes, even sin. This is not true of God. You and I are not like God. But in order to save us, God became like us. In order to be a human being, Jesus had to avail himself of some of his divine attributes. It doesn't mean he's not God. It's like he hasn't turned on the light switch. The light switch is still there. His divinity still exists. But the light's not on because he hasn't flipped the switch. He chose to turn it off. Because in order to be a human being, he can't know everything. Human beings don't know everything. In order to be a true human being, he can't just will things into existence. That's not how you and I live. Well, brothers and sisters, that's pretty profound. I'll tell you why. You ever thought about being a superhero? I have. All the time. Superman is probably like the pinnacle of superheroes because he can do everything. He's almost like a god in the world that he exists in. He can fly, he has x-ray vision, he has laser vision, he's super strong, he's super fast. What if you were Superman? And to save one person, just one person, you had to avail yourself of all that power forever. Would you do it? Probably not. Because you'd convince yourself, well, if this one person will die, but I can do more down the line. I can make up for it. This is such a good thing, I shouldn't just give it up now just for one person. That's not how God thinks. That's not how God acts. Because God is the one, despite possessing everything, despite having all knowledge, all love, all power, he chooses to let go of it, that you and I might be saved. So you might be saying to yourself, Father Zach, that's very nice. Oh, you're so very smart, Father Zach. Yeah, that's so great. What's this mean for me? You are called to be like him. We own, we possess, we live, and yet all of it we must be willing to let go of for the other, our love. That is a tall task. But when we put it in perspective and we look at all that Jesus gave up, everything, so that he could be like you and me, well, maybe you and I can give up our will. We can give up our time, our energy, and maybe even our very lives for the good of the other. He let go of all he possessed to be like us. We must let go of the little we possess if we wish to